Learning target 5E is still continuing writing equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. So we're going to start with example 1. And we're going to graph these two lines described with these ordered pairs and kind of see what happens. So that first one we're going to graph is negative 6, 1. So I'm going to go negative 6, positive 1. It's going to be my first dot. And it ends at 0, negative 7. So I'm going to go 0, negative 7. So I'm going to do my best to connect those two lines. Draw my arrows on each end. Then I'm going to graph that second line. So it starts at negative 7, negative 6. It's right here. Then I have ends at 1, 0. So 1, 0. And then I'm going to connect those. And as I can see, they cross, and I can tell where they cross, it makes this 90-degree angle right here. Okay, if our lines make a 90-degree angle, it's called a perpendicular line. So up at the top here, that perpendicular line. So what we're going to do is actually calculate the slope for each of those. So we're going to continue using this y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1 formula. And I'm going to use that for my first line here. So I have negative 7 minus 1 all over 0 minus negative 6. And two negatives make a positive, so I just wrote plus 6. So negative 7 minus 1 is negative 8 all over 6, and I'm going to reduce that. So I can take a 2 out of both of those, so I have negative 4 over 3 is my slope for this one. So my slope for line 1 is negative 4 over 3. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use line number 2's ordered pairs. So line number 2, I'm going to use 0 minus negative 6, so that became that plus there, and 1 minus negative 7, and that's how I got a plus 7, because two negatives make a positive. So I get 6 over 8, and I'm going to reduce this one. So if I take out a 2, 6 divided by 2 is 3, 8 divided by 2 is 4. I now have the slope for line 2 is 3/4. So when I look at this, the next question is, what do you notice about the two slopes? So when I look at those two boxes that I have circled the slopes or put boxes around the slopes, I notice one is positive and one is negative. So they're opposites. So right, they are opposite. One's positive, one's negative. And then if I look at the fraction, they both have a 4 and 3, but they're reciprocals. So if you recall, I'm going to write they are can't spell today, reciprocals. And if you recall, a reciprocal is just our fraction flipped. So I'm going to pick random letters. So like let's say we have A divided by B. The reciprocal is just switching. So now it's B over A. So that's a reciprocal. So we know that if you can compare their slopes, in this third line here, we're going to fill in that sentence, a perpendicular line, so perpendicular lines have opposite, so I'm going to see if I can fit that on here. I don't know if I can write that small, but they have opposite reciprocals. Reciprocal slopes. So that's the important part. They're opposite reciprocal slopes. So if you're comparing two lines or two equations or two sets of ordered pairs, if they're Ordered pairs are opposites and reciprocals of each other. Or sorry, their slopes are opposites and reciprocals of each other. They are a perpendicular line. So we can kind of use this graph here to demonstrate that. You'll see in this first graph here, we have our slope is that number before x. So right here, number before x. So in the case, this one, it's a positive 2, and this one, it's a negative 1/2. So they're opposites, and then they're also reciprocals of one another, 2/1 and 1/2. So this is perpendicular. Whereas when I look at the second graph here, you have negative 2 and positive 2. They're just opposites but not reciprocal, so it is not perpendicular. In this next example here, we're just going to practice writing reciprocals or opposite reciprocals. So what we need to do is just go through and we're going to write the opposite reciprocal. So the opposite, if this is positive, my opposite is negative, and my reciprocal, I just switched that fraction. So I'm going to have a 2 in the numerator, 3 in the denominator. That's my opposite reciprocal. So for B, my opposite is a negative, and 5 isn't written as a fraction, so I can make it a fraction by putting it over 1. So the reciprocal is 1/5. C, that's negative 1/2, so the opposite is a positive, and the reciprocal would be 2/1, or just 2. For D, the opposite of a negative is a positive, and the reciprocal is going to be 1/2, because really that's 2/1, so I just switched it. And E, that's a positive 11/7, so the opposite is a negative, and the reciprocal is 7/11. Letter F and letter G are kind of tricky. When we do these, in order to get the opposite reciprocal, we must change it into an improper fraction. So as a kind of a refresher on how to change this into an improper fraction, what we're going to do is you take 3, so the denominator, and you multiply it. So I'm going to multiply. Whatever that answer is, you're going to add it, and then you just keep it all over that denominator. So in this case, I have 3 times 4 is 12. 12 plus 1 is 13, and it's all over 3. So these two are equal, which makes the opposite negative and the reciprocal 3/13. So we're going to do that same thing for G. So I'll write that out. We're going to multiply 2 times 3. And here's the important part. You're not going to multiply times negative 3, just 3. And whatever that answer is, you're going to add 1 to it, and then keep the denominator as 2. So we end up 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. So I have 7/2, and then that negative sign just stays with it. So now when I do the opposite, it's going to be positive, and my reciprocal is 2/7. So I kind of went through those a little fast. If you need to, you can press pause, maybe go through and copy down these answers. So if you don't know how I happen to get something or how to change an integer into a fraction, like that -2 and that 5 there, please make sure you ask your teacher tomorrow when you get to class. All right, example 2, we're going to write equations given different information. So that first one, write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to y equals -5x plus 2 and has a y-intercept of -13. Your first step is to identify the slope. So in this case, the slope, if your equation, and remember, this only works if it's written in y equals mx plus b. We know that m is slope. So we know that m is slope. So in this case, my m is negative 5. And if I want the perpendicular slope, it's the opposite, so it's positive, and then I have to flip that 5 to 5 over 1. So I flipped it, or got the reciprocal. So my slope is going to be 1 over 5, and my second step is then to just write your equation. So I know that the y-intercept is negative 13, and in this equation, b is the y-intercept. So negative 13 is my b, so my final equation is going to be y equals m was 1 over 5, x, and b is negative 13. So that is my final answer for my perpendicular line. In number 2 there, where you write the equation of a line that is perpendicular to y equals x minus 6 and passes through the point 6, 4. You have a slightly different step you have to do here. Your first step is still identify that slope. So in this case, it's still that number in front of x. So if there is no number there, it's really a 1. So 1 over 1 is going to be the same if I find the reciprocal. But remember, it also has to be the opposite. So since this slope right here is a positive, my perpendicular slope must be negative. So I have a negative 1. And then in step 2 here, I have to write my equation, but this time, since I don't have a y-intercept, I have to solve for b. I have to find the y-intercept. So I'm going to write mine over here so I have enough space. But I have y equals, my new slope is negative 1, x, and I don't know the intercept, so I'm going to write plus b. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this ordered pair, 6, 4, and replace that for x and y. So I'm going to have 4 equals negative 1 times 6 plus b. And I'm going to draw my line and solve. So that's negative 6 plus b. Copy down the 4. Add 6 on both sides. And I have 10 equals b. So my final answer, y equals negative 1x plus 10. What I would like you to do for these following 2 problems is for number 1 and 2, write your equation for both the perpendicular or parallel, depending on the question asked, and then press pause, try those, press play, and then check your work. All right, check your work. Make sure that on number 2 you didn't forget that said parallel. That's asking you to find the parallel line. This first one was asking for the perpendicular line. So make sure you pay attention, read directions before you actually start your equation. And then to wrap up today's notes, or tonight's notes, this very last one, I want you to try this one on your own. So write the equation perpendicular to y equals x and passes through the point negative 3, 4. Go back, use your notes, whatever you may need. Try this on your own, and we're going to start with this in class tomorrow. So make sure you take your time, make sure your notes are completed, and come with questions.